Welcome to the Sound of Movement podcast. Today we have a very special episode for you. We are going through the top 5 strength training principles for getting seriously strong. Now, if you are into strength training and you don't know this stuff, you are leaving a lot of results on the table.
Like Vasquez said in Aliens, let's rock. If you're new to the tribe, we got Rich behind the mix. Rad is across the table from me, and my name is Yani Baumeister. Together we are Unity Gym, experts at turning driven people into athletes. This episode is proudly brought to you by the Unified Movement System, or UMS, the only online program effectively balancing strength, flexibility, and fitness in an amazingly efficient 60-minute workout. You, of course, get access to both of our amazing at-home and gym workout programs, plus our private coaching group where you can get daily coaching from us. As a valued listener, use the link in the description and you will get your first month free and a 50% lifetime discount. Before we get started, big warm welcome to everyone listening to the replay in the UMS Movement Mastermind Facebook group. Let us know how you are going. Leave a comment and we'll send you guys some love. And lastly, of course, welcome to everyone listening on the podcast and on YouTube Live. Leave a comment and let us know who you are and where you're tuning in from, and we'll send you some love too. How are you, Rad?
Pretty good. I've had a haircut last night. My wife gave me a haircut. She used to be a hairdresser 20 years ago in another lifetime, but we've been in lockdown for so long, and I'm the dude on all these YouTube videos and everything, so I was sick and tired of everyone giving me shit for what I look like. And now I'm looking at myself on this screen. I've shaved, I've had a haircut, I've got glasses now. I look pretty good.
Looks a bit like Clark Kent.
I'm looking pretty Clark Kentish, I think, yeah.
It's about time you got cleaned up.
Man,
our content was starting to slide. Yeah, definitely.
There you
It's
go.
good. And we've got Furkan Alp on the live stream. Hi back. And everyone who is on the live stream, do let us know, and we'll send you some love. We love chatting. Smash that like button, please, and use the little share button if you really want to hack the system and help us get our content in front of more of your amazing friends and inner circle. This is a really cool topic. I could talk all day underwater with a mouthful of marbles about the 10 key strength training principles. Of course, these come from our strength blueprint, which you can pick up as a free download. It's in the description. There's a link there. We have four blueprints for strength, nutrition, flexibility, and of course how we produce the best at-home workouts on the planet. We share all our biggest stuff free. You know, we give all the secrets away for free. They're not really secrets, but we like to make sure that people are training effectively. Greetings from Turkey.
They're not secrets at all. They're just they're very, very well researched and published principles for strength and conditioning. We've just summarized them and put them into a way that is consumable for the average person. There's a lot of stuff out there to look at, a lot of rabbit holes to get lost down, and sometimes you can just forget the most important stuff. And any great coach will get their students to understand and really master the basics before moving on. And these are the basics of strength training that, well, they're not necessarily the basics, but they're the foundation.
Yeah,
you know?
What I was going to jump in and say is it's not just the average person. For me,
Yeah.
like there's so much noise, and luckily, we like to always say that we input data from 3 data points in our program. First of all, it's us. It's our experience training, which is decades upon decades upon decades of trying, researching, putting into practice, putting skin in the game. That's our first data point, us. Our second data point is our tribe, our clients. We've trained thousands of people now over the last 20 years. And if you accumulate the coaching years of myself, Rad, Richard, Will now, who's our coaching manager, and Nilesh and Phil, it's over a decade of coaching experience, so over 70 years of coaching experience. Then then the final data point that we collect information from is science. You know, we research, we hit the textbooks, we learn from people who are better than us. We do courses, we do internships, we go to strength and conditioning summits, we subscribe to the International Journal of Strength and Conditioning. All these things. The good thing is, the science really hasn't changed much in the last 30 years around strength training. So it's not like, oh, if you haven't read the most recent textbook, you're completely behind. And so what we know about the way that the body adapts to strength really hasn't changed much in decades and decades and decades. But that's a good thing. That means that it's really easy to simplify and get right. You know, if it was continually changing like nutrition science, my God, you know, nutrition science, it's kind of like we keep scraping off a layer of the iceberg and you reveal how much more there is to learn. Strength training is very different. And that's really good because we can narrow down the content to these most important principles. And if you focus on these most important principles, and there's only really a handful of them, we've narrowed it down to 10, then you get incredible results. And it helps you to decipher what's fad and what's BS and what's going to produce the result you're looking for. And that's what I love about this topic.
Yep. So let's dive in. Point number 1 from our strength blueprint is the secret to guaranteed gains. And of course, we're talking progressive overload. So I'll give you the layman description of progressive overload. I love this one. If you could pick up 2 10-pound dumbbells, 1 in each hand, and you could do 8 bicep curls, and that was the most that you could do, and you did 3 sets of that twice a week for several weeks, and after 2 or 3 weeks you could now do 12 reps with the 10-pound bicep curls. So then you put down the 10-pound weights and you pick up the 12.5-pound weights, and you go back to being able to only do 8 reps, and then you repeat that process until you can get up to 12, and then you go to 15. That process is a really basic explanation of progressive overload. But it is progressive overload that gets you the results that you want. And so many people get this wrong and they don't understand how to do it. And progressive overload is something that you can track and you can manipulate and you can largely control.
Yeah. Well, this is the, I'm going to dive in and say the most important, the fundamental strength and conditioning principle,
for sure.
progressive overload.
For sure.
And this is where... basically this cuts out, if you look at all of the different workouts that you can do, if you look at all the different sort of training modalities that you can do, this immediately eliminates half of them as far as their effectiveness. And one of those is a classic sort of boot camp style workout or an aerobics style workout, or anything that requires insane amounts of complexity. You know, like if you're doing movements that the limiting factor is coordination. You know, you need to coordinate this routine, otherwise you can't do it, because those routines that require a lot of coordination, although they do a little bit of neural development while you're learning that routine, they're very hard to progress. And so it's very hard to apply the most important principle of strength and conditioning, which is progressive overload. Because if you can't progress it easily, it's very hard to progressively overload the body, and therefore you will not develop strength and flexibility. You probably won't develop much fitness. So when you look at the workouts that are designed as sweat sessions that are just there to sort of get you moving, yeah, they've got some benefit, but they're not going to come anywhere near a good strength and conditioning program that applies the principle of progressive overload.
And this is why for the bent arm strength, well, actually, this is why for definitely the bent arm strength workouts in the UMS, for the first few phases, we have very little calisthenics, because calisthenics for a beginner is hard to apply progressive overload to it, because you only really have the amount of reps that you do, the leverage that you create with the movement, the mechanical advantage or disadvantage by using leverage, and then the exercise selection, the complexity of the exercise selection. And those 3 variables to manipulate to achieve progressive overload are hard for a beginner. With weightlifting, it's far easier, because with weightlifting, it's as simple as either adding weight to the barbell or with going up weight in dumbbells or removing it.
Or increasing range of movement over time.
Yep. So that's much easier for a beginner to get right, and that's why in the first 3 phases of the UMS, it's not that we don't do any calisthenics, because in the straight arm strength workouts, it's all calisthenics, but we limit the calisthenics. We don't, we introduce more and more calisthenics as the progressions, as the phases of the program go up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all, it
And
also...
that's called periodization, which is something that we'll talk about later.
That's right. I mean, and look, I like to say there are 6 variables that we can manipulate to progressively overload your body by manipulating these, either make the workouts harder, more difficult, or easier. And they are, of course, the volume that you do, which is sets, reps, times, time under tension.
Well, hang on, because you're about to talk about a point that is in next week's show.
Oh, really? What's that?
Program periodization. That's point number 6.
Okay.
Yeah?
All right.
So we should probably move on to the second point here. And this is really, when we talk on these shows, this is I'm more of the flexibility and calisthenics dude. Yani is more of the weightlifting and strength training dude. So this is really Yanni's jam here. I'm just kind of steering him in the direction to make sure that he doesn't go down a rabbit hole. But Yani is an expert at this stuff. So point number 2, the actual mechanism of strength gains explained. And of course, we're talking about supercompensation. So again, I'll give you the layman description of it, and then Yani can go deeper into it. So supercompensation, like what you're trying to achieve when you apply progressive overload, and when you lift weights, or when you do stretching, or when you do cardio training, running, whatever, you're trying to achieve adaptation. Make no mistake, when you're in the gym, you're in there to achieve adaptation. You give the body a stimulus, and the goal is that the body adapts to that stimulus. Now, at the peak of that adaptation is something called supercompensation. And supercompensation is what happens when you stress the tissues so much that when you repeatedly stress them, the body responds to that, supercompensates, and elevates beyond your initial baseline. So if we talk about strength, because that's what today's show is about, the idea being, if you were doing a 4-week program block, when you introduce a new stimulus, and this is all, everything I'm about to say is, it's provided that you train hard enough with the correct technique. So so when we say all this, it presumes that you push yourself hard enough with the correct technique. If you push yourself hard enough with the correct technique, what happens is your initial baseline strength can actually even drop in the first week or so. In the second week, it starts to come back up to baseline, and in the third week, you start to achieve supercompensation, where it can start going up. Do you want to talk more about that now, Yani?
Yeah, well, look, the supercompensation effect is... The easiest way to apply this is in your training split, So what we know through quite a lot of research is that the body, as Rad said so eloquently, you stimulate the body with a bout of exercise, a dose of exercise. The exercise initially actually makes you weaker because you're exhausted after it, and usually that happens at its greatest point immediately. You have an immediate strength drop off. Really great way to visualize this is you go and do a massive workout, and of course, if you were to try and repeat that workout immediately afterwards, you wouldn't be able to.
Or even the next day, probably, like doing the same volume, the same intensity, everything. It'd be very, very hard.
You have an immediate drop off. You drop off a cliff after that workout. You deplete all of the muscle substrates, the energy, the ATP, the creatine phosphate, all of that sort of stuff that fuels your muscle. And then of course, if you train hard enough, you cause micro tears and metabolic damage to the tissue itself, the muscle tissue. And then immediately once you leave the gym or finish your run or whatever the stimulus is that you do, whether it's cardio, whether it's gym training, whether it's sport, whatever, immediately once you finish, your body starts to recover. It goes into the recovery phase, and that recovery primarily happens when you go to sleep that night, but it will start to come back immediately. And even 6 hours after a workout, you'll be able to do more than you could immediately after that workout. That's obvious. Everyone knows that. but that recovery creates an arcing curve if we were to graph it, and it starts to level out after about a day, and then after 2 days it's almost finished the recovery. But what happens is, rather than just recovering to the point that you started at when you walked into the gym, the recovery supercompensates, just like Rad said, because of the stimulus. The body kind of goes, well, if I'm going to get tortured like that again, I'm going to need to prepare myself a little bit for it so that I'm better prepared next time. So that the recovery mechanism supercompensates, and the curve actually exceeds, if you're looking at it on a graph, it exceeds the original baseline. And the peak of that exceeding curve is what's referred to as the supercompensation curve. And it's roughly, and it kind of depends on your recovery program and strategies, a little bit on genetics and how conditioned you are to exercise, but it's pretty much on average 72 hours after the stimulus occurred, which is why a good training split will be designed to re-stimulate the same movements or the same muscles roughly 3 days after they're stimulated the first time. And this is why a personal trainer or a strength coach will emphasize consistency is so important with training, because if you stimulate your body on Monday and then you don't stimulate it again until the following Monday, you're leaving a lot of the gains on the table. The supercompensation curve won't come all the way back down to your baseline that you were at before that Monday stimulation, but it will almost come down there. You'll lose a lot of the potential for strength adaptation. And so, we get a lot of people say, oh, I plateaued, I'm not gaining strength, 9 times out of 10, it's because they don't understand this principle. And that is that they're training the same muscle too much. You get the guys that you see in the gym who come in every afternoon and do bench press and bicep curls. And that, initially anything you do will yield the response, but very quickly, usually after a few months, half a year, it just doesn't work anymore because your body's adapted, got that initial stimulus adaptation. And they complain that they're not gaining much strength anymore because they just keep doing it too much and they're not allowing that supercompensation to take effect, or they're not training frequently enough. And you get the people who, train once every week or twice every week, or they might do a chest workout once every fortnight, and they're just not capturing that supercompensation curve at all. So it's really, really important that people understand that. And this is where a good coach and a good program will kick in, because you design the split so that you're re-stimulating that tissue at just the right time, so that it's not too early, it's not too late. We maximize that supercompensation effect.
Yep. And something that a lot of people don't understand is that the peak of supercompensation actually really occurs when you are deloading, right?
Absolutely.
It's so when you get it right, when you do like a 4-week mesocycle like what we do, if you do it properly, like if you watch me doing the at-home workouts, like by the time I'm in week 3 in peak week, I am so fatigued, and I find it very, very hard to get the same amount of reps or to be able to train at that same level I was doing in week 2. And then when you deload and you go through the deload week where you reduce your volume by 60%, by the end of that deload week, you have effectively achieved super compensation and much stronger. Like when I came into this next phase, into phase 7, I was so much stronger. And, to tie into your question that you're asking here, Oscar, saying, is there a minimum or perfect amount of hours of sleep for good recovery? There absolutely is. And the minimum amount of sleep, I would say the absolute minimum is 7 hours, but more perfect is more like 8.5.
There's a couple of variables that come into this. It's a really great question. The answer to, is there a perfect amount of hours sleep for good recovery, as much as you can possibly get, is the perfect amount. There's so much research to indicate that if you can get, when you're really training the body hard, if you can be in bed for 10 hours a night, brilliant, because the reality is that you're only going to get about 8 hours of sleep, 8 or 9 hours. Like I track and monitor my sleep really excessively because it's something that I've had to work in overcoming. I've got all sorts of apps, Fitbits that I monitor my sleep, and I need to be, I hit like lights out at 8:30 to 9 o'clock at night, and I am up out of bed. I spring out of bed at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I'm usually in bed for 9.5 hours, sometimes 10 hours. But out of that, if I track my sleep, you have 4 different types of sleep cycle, and the actual deep restorative sleep, where the really big repair is occurring, is never more than 4 hours. The research sort of indicates that you do want 4 to 6 hours of deep restorative sleep. That's the minimum. Mm-hmm. So you go in cycles where you'll be in REM sleep, you'll be in light sleep, and then you'll be in deep sleep, and you go in these 90-minute sort of sleep cycles. And yeah, you want to try and accumulate about 4 to 6 hours of deep restorative sleep. And for that, you kind of need to go through about 4 to 6 full cycles, and that each cycle is about 90 minutes. So I like to say you've got to have lights out in a cold room. The colder the better, because your body produces more of the right hormones when you're in a colder room at night. It has to be pitch black and has to have good ventilation, and you need to be in that environment for at least 8 to 10 hours if you're training hard, if you want the best results. Don't freak out if you can't replicate that. Just do your best, but yeah, it will help.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
So the next principle that we're going to talk about today from the Strength Blueprint is how to use periodic overreaching to your advantage, super accumulation. We're talking about here.
Yeah, or super compensation. No, that's not super compensation.
Super accumulation.
Super accumulation.
So one of our members from our online training tribe, Blakely, just asked for the super accumulation program, the original one, and you're about to get murdered, Blakely, when you see what is in it compared to the one that you did first time around. But Yani, why don't you talk about what periodic overreaching is?
Yeah, this is like my favorite. I think my favorite of all strength training principles, and I like to do it a couple of times a year. It's a great way to absolutely destroy training plateaus, and it's essentially prescribed overtraining. It's using the overtraining mechanism, like we said with progressive overload and super compensation. Exercise is all about the right amount of stimulation and then the right amount of recovery afterwards to allow your body to fully adapt. And you can bend those rules. You can just like Neo learnt to bend the matrix, you can bend the rules of the body's physiology to squeeze more juice out of the tank. It's not recommended that you do it all like constantly, because it really can take a toll on your immune system. But a few times a year sprinkled in your training is a fantastic way to really continually level up. And essentially what it is purposefully overtraining your body, and then having an extended period of very carefully designed recovery to increase the natural adaptation response. And there's the sky's really the limit with how hard you can train here. It comes down to what you can mentally withstand and also physically withstand. You know, when you do prescribed overreaching, it's not recommended that you ever do it for more than 2 weeks if you're really doing it properly. And then you need roughly 5 days recovery afterwards, where you literally do nothing but eat, sleep, and maybe a little bit of sex in there, because that's going to help stimulate testosterone and other good healthy hormones. And a lot of people get it wrong, because, you know, taking 5 days off, they think, oh no, that's murder. I can't not train for 5 days. Honestly, if you feel like you can train for the 5-day recovery period after a true super accumulation program or a prescribed overreaching period, you haven't trained hard enough during the stimulation period. So
not even close.
We break it into 2 phases. There's the stimulation period and the adaptation period. I like to call it the adaptation period more than the recovery period when I'm talking to people, because it just starts to frame. It's a really purposefully designed period where you're just focusing on the adaptation, and you're doing everything possible in your lifestyle to turbocharge that adaptation. There's nutrition supplementation you can use. You can extend the period of sleeping. You can have day naps. You can go get therapy, physical therapies, massage, needling, things like that. And yeah, you really just double down on your adaptation. So during the stimulation period, usually what we do in our superhuman strength program is that we train 9 times in 2 weeks, so 9 times in 13 days. And then we follow that with a 5-day adaptation period where we use a few nutrition supplements. We increase the daily caloric intake. We increase the daily protein intake. And we eat a variety of foods, natural foods and herbs that help to naturally stimulate the body's testosterone and growth hormone production, things like seaweed. And there's a whole protocol that we use with our tribe to get the best results. And it's incredible. Like it really, if you do it properly, you can expect roughly a 30%, I've experienced a 30% increase in strength. Like just say hypothetically your bench press was 100 kilos for 6 repetitions. You might get up to about 130 kilos by the end of it if you do it properly. It's phenomenal. That's not guaranteed because there are other factors that you need to take into consideration, like, do you have existing injuries and problems and things like that. But when you did it that time, what did you go from with your back squat? You went...
I'm trying to find the back squat so Richard can bring it up on the screen, but I went from... I think my best back squat was just under 150 kilos or around 150 kilos. But that was like my absolute best. And when I finished the 2-week super accumulation program, I did 170 kilos and I did it so well that I tried 180 if you remember, and I got down and halfway up, but I didn't do it. And that was double my body weight. That was exactly double 170. I was 85 kilograms at the time. So for those of you over in the States, it's about 380 pounds or something like that.
When I say 30% strength gain, I don't mean what's your best ever effort ever training. I mean, what did you do at the start of the program, and then what could you do at the end of the program when you retest? Because that usually makes quite a difference. My best ever deadlift is 230 kilos, but if I tried to go pick that up today, I wouldn't be able to do it. I haven't been training in a strength specialization program for that. I might do maybe 200, if I warmed up to it. So yeah, look, for me, it always delivers an incredible result. It's always quite shocking how much strength you can gain, and you can also, if you calorie load, you can also put on a lot of muscle mass during that period too. You can really kick the body into muscle cell myogenesis and just like totally shock yourself in putting on a couple of kilos, maybe 2 to 4 kilos over the 2-week period. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it sure is. And it's it's funny when I remember when I did it and I said to you, can I stretch, or can I do this, or can I do that after my workouts? And you said, man, if you do this properly, you're not going to be able to. And you seriously can't. If you do it properly, it takes a couple of days and you're so wrecked. And the idea is it's all in the name. It's prescribed overreaching. So you're intentionally pushing yourself into a state of overreaching. Oh my God, there's just no room for anything else.
By the second week, the first week you kind of question whether it's happening or it's working, or you're training hard enough. The first few days you're like, oh, this isn't so bad. By the second week, you've got so much accumulative fatigue and DOMS, and you question whether it's sane. You're kind of like, why am I going to the gym right now to repeat these workouts? Why am I going to train twice today? Why am I going to squat every day this week? Why am I going to do deadlifts in this afternoon? And by the end of the second week, you should, if you've done it properly, you start to feel depressed. And you can start to feel like you're getting a flu. Your body is really pushing at the envelope, and that's what you're meant to feel like. It's ridiculous, and we actually do that intentionally. And you might be thinking, "Oh, that's ridiculous. That's not how you're meant to train." Absolutely, you're not meant to train like that all the time. That's why it's a carefully prescribed stimulus that we do only a few times a year, and that's that's what it's all about,
Yep. I think Richie, if you can you bring that up? I found the video where you can see me, but this is so I did this. This is the first time I ever did this, and I went in there. Like, you really got to wrap your head around this, because I went in with my best ever squat being 150 kilos, and this is me 2 weeks later doing 170 kilos, and it flew up so fast that not literally, but that I went straight into trying 180 for me. So let's see, here we go. So there's no knee wraps, there's no belt or anything like that. So it's it's double my body weight.
I reckon that man bun would have given you a couple of kilos too.
Obviously, compared to any power lifters or weightlifting champions, it's nothing, a double body weight squat. But, I'm not on the gear and I'm not a weightlifting specialist, so I was pretty happy with it. So for those Americans out there, it's 374 pounds, and that was exactly double my body weight. Anyway, there you go. There's my very small strength achievement in the world of strength and conditioning, but nonetheless, a good achievement. So now we're on to point number 4, which is how to use different muscle contractions to bust through strength plateaus. Now, the example that we talk about here, and again, I'll just frame this and Yani can jump in, but we talk about there's 3 different muscle contractions that we can use in our training. Now, the first one is a concentric muscle contraction, which is the one that most people are familiar with, which is where the muscle fibers shorten during the contraction. So it's basically the part of any weightlifting movement where you're pushing the weight away from you. So it's it messes with some people's heads in a pull-up, because in a pull-up it's where you're pulling yourself up to the bar. But if you're on a bench press, it's where you're pushing the barbell away from your chest. If you're on a squat, it's where you're standing up. If you're on a deadlift, it's where where the muscle fibers are shortening to create a contraction. Then we've got an isometric muscle contraction, which is where the muscles are neither lengthening nor shortening during the contraction. That might confuse you. You might think, well, how does a muscle contract like that? Well, anytime you're standing up, your body has a series of isometric muscle contractions going on that are holding you up, and you don't even notice them because we stand all the time. But if there were no muscle contractions going on, you'd fall to the floor. And then the third one is the eccentric muscle contraction, which is where a muscle fiber or muscle fibers are lengthening during the contraction. So let's talk about a pull-up. This is the point of a pull-up where you're coming back down. So you've gone to the top of the pull-up, and as you go down is an eccentric pull-up. Now, this is what's really interesting. We actually are about 50% stronger eccentrically than we are concentrically, which means if you could bench press 100 pounds and you could do 1 rep, and that was the most you could ever do, you could actually, most likely, this is, a rough estimate, theoretically, you would be able to take 150 pounds and lower it down under control. Of course, you wouldn't be able to move it at all once it got there, but you're still developing concentric strength when you do an eccentric contraction. And in fact, when it comes to hypertrophy of the muscle fibers, the majority of the work, the majority of the damage to the muscle fibers that causes them to adapt and hypertrophy, become bigger, happens in the eccentric contraction, doesn't it?
That's right. And that's why most good muscular hypertrophy programs, bodybuilding programs, will really slow down the movement, because you want to get more metabolic damage. You want to get as much damage to the tissue as possible, because that's the quickest way to enlarge the cell. And eccentric contractions, slowing down nice slow eccentrics, is a really, really great way to do that. The other thing that eccentrics are extremely good for, beneficial for, useful for, is busting through concentric plateaus. When you can't do a pull-up, when you can't lift yourself up, the most classic example we use in UMS is we use isometrics to correct poor form. So let's say hypothetically, you might be able to do 10 pull-ups, but you can't do 1 good form pull-up, meaning get your chest to the bar, shoulders depressed, scapula and shoulders retracted and depressed, which we call a true pull-up or a true chin-up, We use isometrics in that point to get the body, because sometimes it's a neural dysfunction. You've just never practiced it correctly. This is why we harp on about technique optimization being so critical in the early stages of someone's training and life cycle. if you can't get that form, then you need to just create neurons in that movement. You need to strengthen the brain muscle connection. So isometrics are fantastic for that. Isometrics are also fantastic, of course, for calisthenics, for building core strength, for building movements like holds, flags, levers, planches, things like that. Eccentrics become amazingly important when we're doing movements like chin-ups, like muscle-ups, like squats, because you've got that 50% stronger sort of threshold there. You can often practice a movement in reverse that you can't do yet going forwards, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Of course.
So a really good example is the transition on a muscle up. We use it a lot on the transition on a muscle up when we're training our tribe to do what do you call it? A strict muscle up, not a kipping, ridiculous CrossFit muscle up where you use momentum to get you up. We're talking about strict, slow tempo gymnastics muscle up. Then we will get our tribe doing it in reverse first. And banking reps in that eccentric contraction, as Rad said before, is yielding a result that's making the concentric stronger. And it also is laying those neurons down so that strengthening and thickening those neurons, accumulating fat tissue around those neurons so that when we fire those to try and do the concentric phase, it comes more naturally and stronger.
Yep. Yeah, and it's something that we do with, we've had great results with people that cannot do pull-ups by teaching them how to use isometric contractions and then eccentric contractions. And there's all these calculations and formulas that we teach people to use to calculate how long they should be holding for and how they increase and how they basically apply progressive overload. But in the gist of it, the way that we periodize it is somebody that can't do a pull-up in phase one, we first get them doing feet-assisted pull-ups where their feet are on the ground and it's helping them to learn that technique that we spoke about for technique optimization. Then we teach an isometric pull-up where we have the chest to the bar, still feet supported, but we're really creating a strong connection with the way that you retract and depress the scapula and lift your chest right up to prevent this rounding of the shoulders. And only once we can do that and we've achieved a certain level with it do we then go to eccentric pull-ups, because if we go to eccentric pull-ups too quickly, as soon as people lift their feet off the ground, their shoulders go like that and they lower down slowly. And then once people can start doing those good eccentric reps, that very quickly turns into being able to do proper pull-ups.
Good concentric reps, yeah.
And it's
right.
a really nice process that works really, it works really well, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the secret to our pull-up masterclass, our gymnastic rings masterclass, and our muscle-up masterclass, because so many people try to use bands to bridge the gap, the strength deficit in that ability, and the band really mucks with the strength cycle, the strength curve, and it doesn't carry over to real life. They're only useful when you're trying to overload a muscle, not trying to learn a new skill. Mm-hmm. There you go. You heard it here first.
That's right. So now let's move into the last point for today. And the last point for today is how to use mobility training to maximize your strength gains. Now, it might seem like, what? Mobility helps me become stronger? Well, most people think that you can't be strong and flexible at the same time. This is completely wrong. It's actually it's disadvantageous and dangerous to train for strength if you're inflexible. So this is just the best example that I can think of. If you really think that you can't be strong and flexible, then don't ever watch an Olympic gymnast, because they're going to prove you really wrong.
Or an Olympic
weightlifter.
You know?
Because I'm a pretty flexible person. I mean, we sell flexibility programs that I've used to get really flexible. Put me in a room with an Olympic weightlifter and I am not flexible compared to those people. Those guys are on another level. And the reason why is because when you're not flexible, your muscles actually fight themselves within a joint system that prevent you from being able to express true strength. So I'll give you an example like with a squat. If we talk about just the knee, so there's 3 joints that really come into play in a squat. There's the ankle, knee, and hip. If we talk about the knee joint, you've got the hamstring muscle system and you've got the quadricep muscle system. So they're both muscle systems of multiple muscles that on one side of the knee, the quadriceps create knee extension, and on the other side of the knee, the hamstrings create knee flexion. When you go down to the full range of motion in a squat, if your quadriceps were really, really tight, then as you get to the bottom of the range of motion, they're preventing you from accessing full range of motion because they're so tight. They stop you before you access that full range of motion. Now, this limits strength potential for many reasons. One of them is because you can't access the full stretch shortening cycle of your muscles, and also just because there's a whole bunch of processes that are going on in your body to prevent you from injuring yourself that don't happen in that exact same person that is flexible.
Yeah.
And, again, look at an Olympic weightlifter, and if you're going to argue that they're not some of the strongest people in the world, I don't know where you're getting your information from, because those people are truly phenomenal, and they are so goddamn flexible.
Yeah. A good example we had recently in our at-home workouts where we're doing the live, there was a bit of a debate on what was easier, a pistol squat or a, what are we doing now? It's a shrimp squat. And this is a really great example of what it feels like to use the full stretch shortening cycle. The reason why a pistol squat, for many people who can do it properly, feels easier than a shrimp squat is that the pistol squat uses the full stretch shortening cycle. So you go all the way down to the bottom, and the muscle that's lengthened helps to basically work like an elastic band and swing you back up again, helps you create momentum to come back up again. Whereas when you do a shrimp squat, you're stopping halfway. And so you're not getting that elastic band effect. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, I've done, I'm one of few people who could say this, that I've done my max effort barbell back squat as a stiff person, which is 180 kilos, and I've done my max effort barbell back squat as a flexible person, 180 kilos. I've never squat more than 180 kilos, but I've attempted it and done it and successfully completed it both as a stiff person and as a flexible person. And I can guarantee you it was easier as a more flexible person. Mm-hmm. It felt better. It was easier. It was a lot less effort. It was more effortless, you know, and that's because I was accessing that stretch shortening cycle properly, and I wasn't fighting myself. I wasn't wasting energy trying to tell a muscle to relax and allow me to hit that bottom range.
Yeah, and I mean, I can attest to that as well. I've had, I've tried to get stronger when I wasn't that flexible, and everything just hurts, When you're more flexible, you can just do the movements that you're trying to do so much easier. And it's, what we really try to, and the reason why this point is in the strength blueprint is because we really believe this, and we've experienced it ourselves, and we've produced exceptional results with thousands of members, and we draw examples from real life examples that anybody can see when you turn on the TV by looking at, for example, Olympic weightlifters and Olympic gymnasts. Phenomenal strength, phenomenal, like the highest levels of strength that a human being can achieve, coupled with the highest levels of flexibility that a human being can achieve. Yeah. So, this is something that you really want to wrap your head around. And when we talk about, of course, the point is it's actually about mobility that we're talking about, but mobility and flexibility go hand in hand. And it's something that, if you're listening to something, well, how do I do it? I want to get strong. How do I program for flexibility and mobility training? And the easiest, at the grassroots of it, is that you want to do a 10-minute mobility session before you strength train, which doesn't detract from the strength training that you're about to do. A good mobility session accesses your full range of motion and prepares your nervous system to be able to express strength through full range of motion safely. It includes positioning drills and muscle activation drills, and it doesn't detract from the workout, unlike a stretching session. Yeah. Which we do stretching, but stretching is not to be done before a strength training session. And if you do that and then strength train using that same full range of motion, that's a really good way to start with increasing mobility and getting stronger at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to our first 5 top strength training principles. And those first 5 are arguably the most important, I think. It is so important that you understand progressive overload. It is so important that you understand the supercompensation effect, because if you're training too sporadically or like too often, classic example, doing the same workout every day just to get a pump so you look good, but without actually allowing your body to adapt to the workout properly, or you're not training frequently enough, you're not training consistently enough, then you're really leaving a lot of opportunity on the table and probably not going to ever achieve your strength goals. Same if you're at a level where you've been consistent for a long period of time and you feel like your results are slowing down and diminishing, which will happen, then it might be time to start prescribing a bit of overreaching in your programming every couple of years. And then, of course, mobility, throwing in mobility training and how to use different muscle contractions is going to help exponentially. Next week on the podcast, we're going to talk about how to bring this all in with program periodization, how to put it together, what that should look like, how to plan the macro cycles, mesocycles, microcycles of a program, and what it should sort of look like. We're going to talk about some of the things that the best coaches don't want you to know, because they want you to pay them big dollars to put it together for you. And on that note, of course, you can always join our coaching program and we'll do it for you. We've got a flash sale going on this weekend, which is the Handstand Masterclass. If you want to pick that up, it's an amazing program. I'm going to be teaching you about isometric contractions a lot in that one. It's also really, really good for wrist, shoulder, and core conditioning. And other than that, love to thank everybody who joined us on the live, asking questions, and we will see you all next week.
Have a good one, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, that's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that
It's
far.
the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.